Okay, let's talk about fruitfulness again. I don't even have a PowerPoint for today. It's going to be sort of short. One basic idea that I want to get across, although I'll have a fair amount to say about it. Um, I want to talk, last week I talked about fruitfulness and faithfulness. Today I want to talk about fruitfulness and blessing. So let me start by reviewing what went on last week. And I said last week there was more to the story, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first place that I really started thinking about fruitfulness versus faithfulness was in evangelism. In my early years as a Christian in college, I was in a group that was very, very heavily evangelistically oriented. One of the things we did, for example, was every Thursday night, we used a program called Evangelism Explosion. We would go through and visit, three or four, pair off and go through and visit, two or three student dorms in rooms in a row that week and share the gospel with whoever we could. And one of the things that was frustrating to me is I would share the gospel, but people wouldn't respond a lot. And I was told, don't worry about that. Don't worry about, you can't make people respond to the gospel. All you can do is present it. So you be faithful, let God worry about being fruitful. And that was very important because, first of all, they were saying, don't worry. And secondly, they were saying, don't pick up the responsibility of people being open to the gospel. That's not your responsibility. And third of all, mostly they were saying, don't give up or get discouraged. It's valuable that you've gone out and shared the gospel, even if nobody responded. And later on, when I was less about cold turkey evangelism, sort of sharing people with people on the spot and more about just building friendships, the same kind of thing happened when I was frustrated or feeling discouraged. This thought would be there. Don't worry about being fruitful. Worry about being faithful. You do what you can. Let God actually bring the fruit and bring people to Christ. That's only something he can do, something only he can do. So that was important. Another example was that I was the leader for a long time. I still am, have been for about 25 years of InterVarsity. It used to be, for us, it used to be a Campus Crusade group, but either way, it's the Christian group on campus at the community college. And I've been the faculty advisor for that for years. I lead Bible discussions every week. But most years, there's only been 2 or 3 students. And they don't show up all the time. And so frequently, there would be a meeting where nobody was there at all. And sometimes I would prepare and pray through something and maybe spend even a couple of hours really seeking God for it, getting it all prepared for something I wanted to share. And then I'd show up and nobody would be there. And when they were there, very often in some semesters, nobody was really particularly involved or interested. And it was very discouraging because I felt like I'm doing all this stuff to try to reach out, to try to help them grow. And then it felt like a lot of times there was no response. And I got discouraged by that. So the faithfulness versus fruitfulness is important here. It's saying, don't give up. It's saying it's not a waste of your time if you prepare something, get ready for it, and then get there and there's nobody there. It wasn't pointless. It had a point because the point was you were faithful to what God had called you to do. And that was good. But there's more to the story. It's not quite so simple because it does matter whether people respond. Of course it does. I do care about fruitfulness. Of course I do, because the whole reason I'm doing these things is so that people can respond. If I share the gospel, it's because I want people to get saved. My motivation for sharing the gospel, people kept telling us, share the gospel if you care about people being saved and not going to hell. Well, then of course I care whether they respond. If I'm just faithful but they don't respond, they're still going to hell. That's feels kind of like a failure because they're not saved. I mean, it's bad. Or when I'm there, I want to see people grow. I prepare this stuff for InterVarsity because I have Christians. I want to help them grow and find victory in their lives and really mature and become closer and closer in their walk with God. And if they're not there, I'm not able to do that at all. So in one sense, of course I should care about fruitfulness. Of course I should care about people's response. If they don't respond, it will sadden me. If I didn't care about the response, I would end up just going through the motions, just doing things without really caring about whether people responded at all. And that doesn't seem like love. That doesn't seem right. So on the one hand, I need to not care about fruitfulness. And on the other hand, I need to care about fruitfulness. Somehow I needed to figure out how to care about fruitfulness without caring about fruitfulness, if you know what I mean. And I didn't. It took me a long time to sort that out. So the key last week for me was to distinguish between fruitfulness and faithfulness. The key this week was it became important for me to distinguish between fruitfulness and blessing. And here's what I mean by that. I realize it means a lot more than this, but in this context, here's what I mean by that. By blessing, I mean that God brings good into the lives of those I'm serving. I'm praying that God would bless them. And I'm using that as a very general term, meaning bringing good into their lives. By fruitfulness, I mean God bringing lives into good into the lives of those I'm serving using me and using what I did. The key was when the Holy Spirit sort of confronted me one time as I was evangelizing and sort of said this: look, which do you care more about? Do you care more about the fact that they get saved through what you share? Or do you care more about that they get saved no matter how it happens? And I was like, oh, definitely the second one. It's not that it has to be me. It's that it has to be somebody. I want them to find the gospel. I want them to find Jesus. And so what I've been learning what I learned, began to learn then, and it took a few more years for it to take, is that I want to pray for blessing for those whom I serve first, regardless of whether it has anything to do with me. And then second, I can pray that I would be fruitful, that it would happen through me. So blessing is when, if I'm sharing the gospel, blessing is when they are blessed because God brings them to Christ. Fruitfulness is when he does it through me. And I want to pray for blessing first and fruitfulness only second. It's okay to pray for it, but only second. And that's what I started trying to focus on. So one thing this affected is the way that I teach. I often, like for these, I get to do teaching every Sunday night. Other times I've had places where I can preach a sermon or give a teaching or something. Somebody around that time shared one time, pray for the goal of the teaching more than you pray for the teaching. What they meant was pray for the reason for the thing you want to be happening in people's lives, not for the teaching itself, although that's what your focus is on, but pray for the goal of the teaching. And I think that's really good. Let me take an example. Suppose, okay, this last week, I don't know this week because I'm doing this ahead of time. Last week, PJ preached on baptism. And he preached on the fact that you don't have to be baptized to be saved. Salvation is through Jesus plus nothing, not Jesus plus baptism, but just Jesus. But on the other hand, he also was preaching that if you do get saved, you should then be baptized. You should be obedient, follow Jesus' baptism, without mixing up that you don't get saved through it. So if I'd been preaching that sermon, it would have been very easy because all my focus is on preparing it and making sure I'm ready for it. And I'd be praying, let it be clear, let it be organized, let it be powerful, speak through it, all those things. And those are all great to pray for. But if you were asking me to pray for that sermon, the first thing I would ask is, what's your goal? What do you want to happen in people's lives as a result? And here's the goal, that everybody would be super, super clear on the fact that baptism does not save you, that you're saved by Jesus alone. And that everybody would be super clear on the fact that nonetheless, if you're saved, you should get baptized. That's part of obedience. And that those two wouldn't confuse each other. And so if I were praying for that, if I were PJ praying for that, I would spend most of my time praying that that's what people would get. And I would pray that they get that whether it happened through me or not. It'd be like, look, if they've already learned that somewhere else, that's great. If I preach it to them or they don't get it, but then they hear it someplace else, that's great. If I say something wrong, but just keep them from getting the wrong part of it and get the right part of it. Whatever you need to do, accomplish that for them. And then what I'm doing is trying to help reach that goal, to help be a servant to them, to help them to have that clear understanding of baptism. And then secondly, by the way, it'd be great if you do it through my sermon. Be great if you do it through how I said it and what I said and my passion about it and my understanding of it. So that's the way I try to preach about anything that I'm teaching. I try to, first of all, pray for the goal of the teaching, and only secondly, pray that the teaching itself will go well, because I care about the goal far more than I care about whether I had to be a part of it or whether my part in it was perfectly executed. That's the sense in which I leave the fruitfulness to God. But not in the sense that I don't care about the goal. Of course I care about the goal. Another way that this really affected me a couple of years ago was through this idea that I should simply love the people I serve. I'm not just going through the motions. I do want them to respond well. This happened within a varsity. That was this group that was, at that point, it was very discouraging every year when I had a really low number of people. And that discouragement was messing with how I was as a leader. It was making me, I was dreading going to the meetings. And I knew that was bad for me as a leader. It wasn't good for them or for me. So one summer, I knew this was coming up and I prayed all summer on and off, God, would you please show me how not to be discouraged? How just to have the courage and the faith to keep trusting that you're doing something important through this. And somewhere along the line, I recall vaguely that the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, here's what I need you to do, Kevin. I just want you to love them. And I kind of argued back and said, I want to love them, but I don't know how because I can't figure out what to do that will help them. And he said, no, I didn't say help them. I just said love them. All I'm asking you to do is to care. Just have the emotional commitment to care. And I was like, okay, I can do that. And so all semester, all year, and that whole year, we only had a couple of people. There wasn't a lot going on. And there were a lot of times when I would be in there with them and I just had no idea how to be helpful to them. I had no idea what to make things work, but I thought, but I'm going to love them anyway. And so I'd walk in and I'd think, I care about these students. I care about how they're doing with Christ. I care about the struggles they're having. I care, even though I don't always know what they are, I care about their learning and growing. And I just care. And at the end of the year, not much more had happened than ever before, but I just remember feeling really settled about the fact that I had done what God had called me to do. It felt really right. And I started doing that in other things. A lot of the secular classes I teach as a college professor, I'll teach a class in philosophy. There's nothing Christian about it. I don't get to share the gospel. None of that comes up. But I started thinking, but do I care about my students? In a community college, a large proportion of students are having life mess with them as they're trying to take classes. They've lost a job, or they're dealing with alcoholism, or they've gotten a divorce, or something has happened that's really messed with their lives. And they're trying to handle all that as they're trying to take classes. And they don't really care very much about my class, except that it's sometimes really stressing them out. And I want to care for I'm not going to be able to know even if they're struggling with anything. I'm certainly not going to be able to do anything or very much about it if I find out about it. But I can walk into class and love them and care about how their lives are going, even if I don't know what to do about it. And what I started doing is, as I would hit the door of the classroom and about to walk through the doorway, I would pause for a minute and I would think to myself, remember, you love these students. And I'd walk to the front of the classroom, get everything prepared, and before I opened my mouth to start the class, I'd look around quickly at the faces of each of the students and think, I don't know which ones of you are hurting. I don't know which ones of you are having a great day. I can't know, and I don't know that I can do much about those things, but I do care. I'm here because I love you. And then I would start teaching the class. And I don't know whether it was ever visible to the students, but I know when I started the class that way, I knew I was in the will of God as I was teaching. I knew I was doing, and sometimes my teaching would go really well, and sometimes it would go really badly. I would make a mess of things. I would explain things awkwardly, and I would confuse the students more than I helped them. But it didn't matter. I mean, it mattered, but I knew when I went in with the right attitude that I was where I needed to be. So this was what it has meant for me to learn, pray for the blessing of those I serve first, before I pray for my own fruitfulness. Just help my students, God, to come to know you, help them in their lives with whatever they're struggling with, even if I can have nothing to do with it except just prayer, which is something. But bless them, whether you do it through me or whether you do it in spite of me or whether you do it, in another class or with somebody else or with things that they're in their own community, their own family, just bless them. And then secondly, yes, if you can use what I'm doing, how I'm being as a teacher, what I'm being for them, if you can use me to support them and strengthen them and help them as well, please do that. Okay, so that's the thing that I begin to realize. Not just fruitfulness, not just be faithful, but be faithful and care. Care about whether they respond. But it doesn't have to be a response to me. It just needs to be that God blesses them in some way through somebody. Pray for the goal of the teaching more than for the teaching. Care about how their lives are going. And that to me is an important thing to add to what we said last week. It's not just worry about faithfulness, go through the motions. It's worry about faithfulness or focus on faithfulness. Don't focus on fruitfulness, but do be praying for blessing and then asking for fruitfulness. Now, next week, I want to look at fruitfulness more specifically. I keep saying it is okay to pray for fruitfulness. That is, it is okay to pray not only God bless them, but bless them through what I'm doing, through my service, through my passion, my ideas, my understanding, what I'm trying to offer. And part of that happens through spiritual gifts. And so next week, I want to talk about fruitfulness and gifting and how those relate. Okay, see you then.